Welcome to letter writing. I'm Justin Rempel. So before we start talking about how to write a letter properly, we need to think a little bit about what a letter is. So a letter is really a form of written communication. You've got a message to deliver from one person to another, or sometimes one party or group to another. And we often think of the physical letter that's delivered through the postal system, but a letter can also be delivered electronically. Sometimes we think about an informal letter when we're talking about letters, which is just like personal messages that are written from one person to another person that they know quite closely. Informal letters contain those really personal messages. People know each other well. And in those letters, it's quite acceptable to use very casual language because you know each other personally and you don't really need to impress each other. On the other hand, a formal letter, something like a business letter, is going to convey a professional message. So those types of letters are going to use much more formal or professional language to reflect their purpose. Either way, whether we have a formal letter or an informal letter, there's generally about 7 parts to constructing a proper letter. So we're going to break down these parts and then take a look at an example at the end of a letter that contains all these parts. The first part we want to think about is the heading. And we are talking about these in the order that they appear on the page. The heading is at the top of a letter. And generally, the heading contains the return information. Usually you just see headings in formal letters. It's going to be, like I say, at the top of the page. It's probably going to be centered or maybe right aligned. And it contains the information of the sender, so the company name or the personal name and the address to return it to. Informal letters usually don't have headings. They don't include this part. Of course, if you're sending a letter through the mail, it's going to have the return address on the external envelope regardless. The second thing that we want to see in a letter, a little bit further down the page, is the date. The date is very important. It indicates when the letter was sent. The date is always on its own separate line, and it's usually left aligned towards the left side of the page. This is going to be in any letter, regardless of whether it's formal or informal. The third part of a letter is the addressee information. This is usually left aligned, usually single spaced. It's kind of just a block of text of information that's all together. And this contains the address and other information, phone number, email address, that kind of thing, of the recipient, of the person or party who's receiving the letter. And this is in basically every letter, whether it's formal or informal. Very important to include. However, it does not yet include the person's name or the company's name, because that's going to be in a future part, the greeting. Part 4, the greetings or the salutation. This is the part that contains the recipient's name. And it's really where we get started on our actual message or the body of the letter. It's on its own line, so it's separate from the body, it's separate from all the headings, and it's going to include some kind of preposition or term of affection usually. It must have the name of the recipient, and then there's going to be a comma before we start a new line and we get into the body of the message. In an informal letter, we often start with "Dear so-and-so." So if you were writing to me, you would say, "Dear Justin, comma, new line," and then we start our message. In a formal letter, it's a little too personal to use the word "dear" because that means darling or someone I like or someone who's close to my heart, right? So in a formal letter, we would not use "dear" in our greeting. We would maybe just use "to so-and-so." It would be more official. So if you're writing to me, you'd say "to Mr. Rempel," and then a comma, a new line. We start our body, our main message. You can just put the person's name or the company's name and then a comma. You don't really need to have this extra little word in there, but letters often do. Part 5 is the body. This is the main message of our letter. It's written in complete sentences and proper paragraphs. Okay, a letter is not going to be point form. A letter is not a list. It is not poetry. It is full prose. So complete proper sentences, complete proper paragraphs. How long should a letter be? That depends on the content of what you have to say. If you're writing a personal letter, it's going to be as much as you want to say to the other person. What do you want to tell them about? It can really be up to you. In a formal letter or professional letter, it's more based on the topic. You're going to have some very specific purpose. Maybe you're writing a complaint, maybe you have an inquiry, and you need to make sure that you fully expressed all your information before you're done your letter. In informal letters, we can really use casual language. We can use abbreviations, contractions, we can use slang, we can use inside jokes. So even though we're writing in complete sentences, it's really a lot more lax with the rules. And that's because it's just a personal exchange. In formal letters, we absolutely do not use casual language. We don't use contractions, we don't use slang, we definitely don't use inside jokes, okay? We need to use professional formal language. Part 6 is the closing. Once we're done the body, we've delivered our main message, we need to end off the letter properly. And there are 2 parts to the closing. There's some kind of word of farewell, and then your name. So in an informal letter, that word of farewell is often sincerely, yours truly, regards, best wishes, something like that. In a formal letter, it's usually sincerely. That's the most common closing word that you see in a letter. That closing word gets its own line, followed by a comma, and then we hop to a new line for the name. Sincerely just means I really mean it. Whatever I'm saying, it's honest, it's true. Again, our name comes on a new line. If you're writing an informal letter, you might just use your first name or even a nickname, right? I might use Justin or even Justy if I went by that with someone. In a formal letter, if I was writing it, I would definitely use my first and last name, Justin Rempel, or even a professional title, Mr. Rempel, Dr. Rempel. I'm not a doctor, but if I was, I might use that title. Part 7, the postscript, or PS for short, is sometimes there's a short message that's added after the main message. It's kind of an afterthought, and we use the abbreviation PS to tack on this little extra message after the closing and everything. This would show up sometimes in an informal letter. You really should not see this in a formal professional business letter because you should have said everything that you intended to say in the main body of the letter. So if we just look at the layout, this is from ProCopyTips. It's a website, and here it's outlining exactly what we looked at, the 7 parts of a letter. So you can see at the top, there's a centered line across the top. That's the heading. The information for the sender, and then there's the date left aligned on its own line. Then there's the address of the recipient, the proper information, followed by the greetings, dear so-and-so, on its own line, comma, and then a space, and we start the body. This letter is quite short. It's only 1 paragraph, but it's a proper paragraph with proper sentences. And then we close off with the closing, sincerely, yours truly, so-and-so. And then there is, in this case, a postscript, a PS message at the very, very end. And you can kind of see how there are spaces in between each part of the letter. So they're on their own lines, and then there's a gap before the next part of the letter starts. This is the general layout of what a good proper letter should look like.